My name is Monica Helgoff. I oversee business development for TalentMap's Western region, and I will be hosting today's session. Before we get started, I just want to cover off a couple of agenda items as well as some housekeeping items. So first of all, let me take this opportunity to introduce our presenter, Norm Baillie-David, and he's TalentMap's Senior Vice President of Consulting. Norm works with our clients across North America to help interpret their survey data and develop action planning strategies to improve the workplace. Today, Norm is going to be exploring what HR professionals can do when survey results reveal that senior leadership is the problem. We're going to spend about 5 minutes today exploring the importance of senior leadership in engaging employees. We'll spend another 15 minutes looking at what the best leadership teams do better than everybody else. And then Norm is going to give you some practical tips on breaking the news when it isn't so good. We'll leave about 5 minutes for Q&A. So if you wish to submit a question, you'll see a chat feature to the right of your screen. You can submit your questions at any time during the presentation, but as stated, we won't be addressing them until the end of the session. Copies of the presentation deck and a link to the webinar will be available on our website within about a week's time. So before Norm launches into his presentation, I just want to give you a couple of background slides on TalentMap for the uninitiated. TalentMap has been in business for well over 15 years. Our sole focus has been on workplace measurement. We have well over 7,000 employee engagement surveys under our belt since inception. We have surveyed over 1 million employees, and we do over 500 employee engagement surveys annually. We work with organizations ranging from 50 employees all the way up to 100,000 plus. So this is just a sample of our clients and some of the different vertical markets that we work in. We do a lot of work in awards programs. That enables us to pull best practices from very large normative databases, and we can share those insights with our clients and on webinars such as this. We do work with technology and engineering firms, a lot of work in the not-for-profit and public sector areas, healthcare, industry, and financial services. So I'm just going to turn over the presentation to Norm, and thank you very much.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is you are on this fine continent. Thankfully, I think I was in Edmonton yesterday, and I think I brought back some of their good weather, so thank you, Monica, for that, and everybody else who's sitting out in Edmonton. A lot of people in the East are finally in a decent mood. So anyway, what I wanted to do with you is relate a little bit of some recent experience in terms of dealing with some of the thorny issues of engagement, because as you probably already know, if you work with TalentMap, or even if you work with a different provider of engagement, or even if you do your own surveys, it usually is the HR folks that own this process. That at least if you don't own it, you basically are responsible for managing it. And lo and behold, what we're seeing increasingly happen in terms of getting the survey completed, and then getting the results, is that unfortunately you find yourself in a situation where it is actually senior leadership that comes out as not only one of the most important determinants or influencers of engagement, but also that they're not very well perceived in the organization, and that the route to improved employee engagement is actually means or requires the change of behaviors amongst the senior leadership team. So obviously, when you're in the HR position, that's going to create a thorny situation for you. What I wanted to do, talking to you about today, is to first of all hopefully give you some ammunition, give you some help in terms of how you can deal with that. And the first thing we want to talk about is really If you're going to get senior leadership to change behaviors, the first thing you're going to have to do is convince them that those behaviors need changing to begin with. So, and that means what is the link? What's the importance of senior leadership in engaging employees? So I'll spend a bit of time on that, and then I'll answer the question that I get asked most often when, even by senior leadership teams, when they come to this realization, and then that's, what is it that the best practice organizations do that we don't do? What makes them so special? Why are other senior leadership teams better than we are, for lack of a better phrase? So I'm going to spend a lot of time on some of those behaviors that separate the best performers, and that comes directly from TalentMap's database. And then finally, what I'm going to do is really get into some, hopefully some helpful tips in terms of how do you actually break the news, without doing a CLM, career limiting move, here, in a way that senior leadership will not only accept, but will also result in behavior change, and then more importantly, in the improvement of engagement. So here's a slightly dated cartoon, but I think probably of very, very specific relevance even today. We have met the enemy, and he is us. And that's something that I tend to show when I do a senior leadership workshop. And that really is, it's the beginning of the process of having to look in the mirror and not liking what you see. And that begins the process of communicating those results. I guess the first thing I'd like to do with you today is really show you from our perspective, from TalentMap's perspective, and of course from you as the client or the engagement user, what it looks like. What is the difference between an engaged organization? What does that look like from where senior leadership positioned in an engaged organization versus in organizations that are not so engaged? And what I've done here is I've clipped out a couple of slides. So in this particular slide, I've taken a very, very high-performing top 10% organization, medium-sized financial institution, actually not even institution, I would say financial firm, roughly a couple of hundred employees. And I'm showing you two sort of slides superimposed here. The first on the left is the actual engagement results. So those are the 6 questions that we ask every organization and all employees in terms of how do we define engagement. And as you can see, the green represents the percent of people who agree or strongly agree with the 6 statements on the right. The top overall engagement is the simple average. The blue represents those people who neither agree or disagree. The overall engagement score is 89. As you can see, there was not a single employee in this particular organization that can be called disengaged. And you can see scores virtually off the charts on some of the key indicators of engagement. The pride, 98% are proud to work for this particular organization. Over 90% are optimistic. Over 90% are inspired and would recommend their organization. Even 80% provides one with a sense of personal accomplishment. So you can see these scores are very, very high. So that's all fine and good. What's the relationship with senior leadership? And I bring your eye over to the right-hand side in that green circle. So what we see is a specific trend. I just picked out one organization to demonstrate or illustrate, but this is a very, very common occurrence. When this is actually the case, when we see the best performing organizations and that have scores that you see on the left-hand side, you also see on the right-hand side senior leadership being at the top of the charts. Now, this particular chart basically is showing 2 things at the same time. It's showing from top to bottom those dimensions that score higher than the average, better than benchmark, at the top, and working, working down the ladder, right down to the lowest within this particular firm. In this particular organization, everything tends to be above average, as I've told you before. From left to right, you see those dimensions and their relative level of importance in terms of influencing engagement. And as you can see, senior leadership is really on the right-hand side of this. So not only are they very, very well perceived, internally in the organization and compared to other organizations, so as being better than the benchmark. But that's also a very strong driver of engagement. It's influence, it's wind in the sails of the organization. And is it causal or is there causality here? Everything that we have done to date would suggest that there is at least a good proportion of causality. What I'm talking about there is a good perception of senior leadership cause high engagement. I think in our research and in our experience, the definite answer would be yes, especially when it is such a strong engagement driver. So let's look at the contrast then. So this is what we're aspiring to. This is what we want every organization to look like. So what are we seeing more typically? Well, this is probably a very, very typical organization. Also same industry. We wanted to get it comparable. Roughly same size, both financial sector. And here we see engagement not too bad at 69 because there's some things that are quite strong here. Pride is quite strong at 86, and so is personal accomplishment is quite strong at 84. But we do see some caveats, some issues or difficulties that are driving down engagement. There's two in particular where if we see that, we know that this is probably going to be a case where the issues are around leadership and vision, and specifically leadership. And that is when we see optimism about the future of the organization begin to wane. As we do on this chart, it's only 58% favorable. And we also see the bottom statement there, seeing a clear link between one's work and the organization's long-term objectives. We see that go down. And the third one we see go down is recommending the organization to a friend as a great place to work. So in an engagement-challenged organization where leadership is becoming an issue, people are less optimistic. They're more uncertain. They don't see how they fit in the big picture, and that's so important. And this is probably one of the biggest disconnects. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but one of the biggest disconnects in terms of how senior leadership teams view the world and everybody else is senior leadership assumes it's automatic, that everybody in the organization automatically sees how they contribute to the big picture. And that nothing could be further from the truth. So when that link is not very, very clear, then people start to disengage. Now, what do we see on the right-hand side? If you remember what it looked like with the engaged organization, senior leadership, very, very influential in terms of determining engagement, and right at the top. Well, in this case, you see, if not more, equally influential in terms of how strong engagement is, but in a negative way. So when senior leadership becomes an issue, they're a big issue. And as you can see here, when we're talking about things, dimensions where this organization is considerably lower than average or worse than average, which dimensions are perceived more poorly than others, we can see right at the bottom of the heap that organizational leadership or senior leadership in this particular organization and its evil twin sister, the vision, are at the bottom of the heap. So there's no question when we're looking at these results that the road to higher engagement leads partly through improving the perception of senior leadership. It is the single strongest engagement driver, and this pattern really is quite predictable. I know there's a number of people on the line today that have actually have similar, very, very similar results and very, very similar situations, or find themselves in situations such as this. So I'm hoping that what I'm going to say in the next 20 minutes or so is going to provide a helping hand as you move forward. So that's the engaged challenge organization. Whoops, hold on. Okay, here we go. So just now drilling down on the senior leadership, perception of senior leadership. Remember that engaged organization, when we look at the actual statements and the agreement with statements around the behaviors of senior leadership, look what we see in terms of the engaged organization. 97% favorability around senior leadership. Setting ambitious goals, everything. I don't have to read the different statements. We have a very positive halo effect here. What's a halo effect? It is the tendency amongst survey respondents to not discriminate between different attitudes if they feel and basically get their feelings out, rating things very, very similar. And you can see that here. The halo effect works both in a positive and a negative light. So when senior leadership is on, when people feel good about their senior leadership, this is the situation that we find ourselves in. And of course, that ratchets through to see the overall level of engagement that what we found before. So how does that compare to our other organization? Well, you can see a little bit of a contrast here. So whereas overall senior leadership is rated in the engaged organization at 97, the more problematic organization here, you can see not only do you see quite low favorable scores, so under 50 in most cases, considerably under 50 in a lot of cases. A lot of people tend to sit on the fence. So you've got about a third of the organization, as much as 38% in this case, really not wanting to tip their hand or to wait. They don't want to chastise senior management. A lot of people feel very uncomfortable chastising their senior leadership, not because they're going to get found out in the survey, only because they understand that by doing so, they're coming to the same realization and grips that senior leadership is going to have to change something, and that's not a comfortable position. And of course, you see on the left-hand side a large degree of unfavorability towards senior leadership. So this is the picture. Unfortunately, the engaged, there's about 90% of companies that represent, I wouldn't say 90%, but 50 to 60% of the companies that we survey look more like the right-hand side than the left-hand side. And when we're talking about ammunition for senior leadership, you know what? I hear a lot of rationalization in the boardrooms. I hear a lot of, you know, we're always gonna get dissed in a survey like this. It's just a way for people to vent. Well, you know what? There are very, very hard costs when we have issues with senior leadership. And on this slide, what we have are the two engaged versus not so engaged responses to thinking of leaving or thinking of accepting a job with another employer. So you guess which one has the issues with senior leadership. And these two answers come directly from the clients that we've been talking to or referring to. So I'm not just picking the worst and the best on every question. These are the same clients throughout. So as you can see, when we're engaged, when our senior leadership is motivating and inspiring, we have a very high level of loyalty. Only 7% of people answered in the affirmative. When that's not the case, 60% in this particular case with this client are looking to leave. So as you can see, even though 60% aren't going to walk out the door tomorrow, that's definitely something that you can point to and say, you know what, folks, we have a risk here. We have a bona fide risk of some major attrition and some costs as a result, and business disruption as a result. So this is the burning platform that we need and that we use to get senior leadership's attention. Most of the time when we're talking about the engagement questions, it gets fluffed off. When we start to put this number in front of them, they pay attention. That's when the eyes open wide and, oh my God, it sits in for a second. If, they just contemplate for a second, if we lose, 30 to 40% of our staff within a year, what are the ramifications of that? So this is very, very, if we're talking about ammunition in terms of getting senior leadership's attention, this is the one we go for, and it's very, very effective. So that paints the picture. I don't think, hopefully, you'll see the pattern now. When senior leadership's working, what does that mean for engagement? When it's not working, what does it mean not only for engagement but also for potential attrition? So now that we've got senior leadership's attention, hopefully, with this, and the fact that not everybody is in that same boat, we can point to organizations that perform very, very well. So that's the other thing leadership teams tend to rationalize. They assume that their results are the same everywhere else. And in many cases, the benchmarks are they're not that far from benchmark because the benchmarks are so low on these things. We need to point them to those top 10%. So the next question begs then, what is it that those guys are doing so much better than we are? What are the best senior leaderships doing best? What are the behaviors that we can point out that differentiate and cause for such a positive view of leadership? And The best way I like to do, there's a lot of data behind this, and a lot of research, but I find getting the point across is really when we put the comments of employees and what employees are saying, and then start to rationalize and provide themes around those comments to show the differences between positive and less desirable behavior. So when we see positive comments coming, we most often see them around these potential themes. So first of all, very satisfied with the company culture. I think this is a great place to work. Have fostered a team environment and is supportive of its employees. Keep that word in mind, supportive. When we, that is a major differentiator between senior leadership teams that are well viewed and senior leadership teams that are not so well viewed. And you see, you know, they support me or I'm not supported, and that really is going to be a kicker. Company or the client is a great place to work. Strong communication of the firm vision is what drives and motivates employees to continue performing their best. I facetiously referred to organizational vision in a previous slide as the evil twin sister of senior leadership, and this is why. Because as we're seeing, even in the most hierarchical of organizations, even the employees that work at the front line, they need to understand the direction of their organization. They need to understand where the leadership is taking them. Basically, if they're going to follow, they need leaders to lead. And what leaders leading means is articulating very, very clearly in more than just platitudes and high, lofty statements where they want to take the company or the organization. What is their picture? They have to paint a picture of what the organization is going to look like in 3 to 5 years. And it's not enough just to say we value client service and that kind of stuff. Or people are looking for clues that the leadership is going to take them to a better place than they are today, and they want to buy into that vision. And this is where often leadership teams feel that they do. They feel that they've got the portrait of the vision and the mission statement on the boardroom wall, but in actual fact, what we actually find out is it stays in leadership teams' heads and maybe the people around them, and it doesn't go further than that, and then they get frustrated when they hear these types of comments. And this is the first thing we tell people is get out there, get your people on, communicate what it is in a compelling way, and don't assume that they know that where you're going, because they don't. So transparency is the next one. Stay transparent with the organization's objectives and developments. Here, the next positive one, I feel they walk the walk. We hear a lot about walking the talk and walking the walk, acting consistently, and of course that word supportive comes out. And then finally, the culture. When we see cultures where it's really like one big family, and it's the matriarch or the patriarch in senior leadership that treats people like one big family and everything that entails. These are the types of comments, the euphemisms that come out of employees when we see very, very positive comments around leadership. So what do we hear when that's not the case? We hear a number of things. The first one is visibility, connectedness, empathy. We hear a lot of leadership are they listening? Are they doing everything in their power to support us? They make decisions in a vacuum. They have no idea what's going on in the front lines. We never see them. Those types of comments. Especially from frontline workers, you'll often hear the comment, they don't understand what I do. And that really is around visibility. It's around feeling connected to senior leadership, and then feeling that senior leadership is empathetic with them, understands what they do, understands what it is that are frustrated, what's frustrating in the day, and takes that into account in decision making. When that's not the case, you start to see this disconnectedness happen. So set, communicate, follow up, clear and realistic goals. Goal setting is so key, and it's the next step in terms of vision. Ambitious goals, if they're not realistic, if expectations are out of whack, and basically you get the comment that I just talked about, empathy. If goals are set in a vacuum or are set based on some external, what's the word I'm looking for? External force. Often in public sector that can be political. Then you get, well, they don't know what I'm doing. They don't understand. How could they set a goal like that if they knew what we're going through here? So if goals are not clear and realistic, that's what you get. And then there's priorities. And this one is much more an issue on the public sector side than it is on the private sector side. It's when everything is a priority. Everything's important. And you have lists of priorities that are 12 and 15 and 20 long, even if they're well articulated. Employees are looking for decisiveness, and what that decisiveness means is setting clear priorities and sticking to those priorities. In other words, making choices to keep priorities, the key ones high and focused on that, and then diverting resources towards them, and that by the same token, chastising middle management when they're not doing that and allocating resources to those priorities as a consequence. And then, as I was talking about before, the clear and compelling vision. You can read the quote on the bottom there. It's really, I think I made the point in terms of how important setting that clear and compelling vision is to employees. So, getting to now, when we look at, we can see the anecdotes start to emerge, but what are, how do we move from those anecdotes to a series of best leadership practices that we know that engage? You know, what is that secret sauce? And there's a number of categories here. The first one is building trust and honest communication. Transparency is particularly important, and particularly even more so in difficult times, when we're going through periods of change, when there's restructuring taking place. We too often see senior leadership teams turtle. And what I mean by that is they go into the boardroom, they know they have to make tough decisions in terms of restructuring, and they basically put the cloak of secrecy around the boardroom for fear, which is ironic, that there's going to be rumors that start that if there's information about this restructuring, if there's information about the direction that's happening, that people are going to start rumors. And in actual fact, the opposite is what takes place. So in the absence of information, people create their own. And of course, the rumors are always more negative than the actual reality. So when senior leadership teams are frank with staff, are honest about the situation, good, bad, or ugly, what they always underestimate is the degree to which their employees want to rally behind the cause and do what it takes, even in a difficult situation. And when that happens, there's an immediate bond of mutual trust that happens. People feel that they're let in. People feel that they want, they are a part of the big picture, and that is actually what engages it. The next thing around building trust and honest communication is that we see a clear differentiation between those organizations where senior leadership takes ownership of the people agenda, and engagement isn't just delegated to the HR team, and and of course, when senior leadership is an issue, engagement is an issue, and it's HR's problem. When senior leadership has that attitude and they don't take ownership of the people agenda, you have the negative effect. It's when senior leaders do take ownership of the people agenda and then make it their own, that's really going to improve engagement. And how do they do that? Well, people priorities are embedded in business strategy. And to the extent that trade-offs are made that favor people over short-term gain, short-term profits, because there is that view that in the long term it's going to be better for the organization. And finally, something very, very pragmatic is that in terms of building, I talked about restructuring before, but when we're talking about recruiting, if talent is built more than bought, so often we see people disengage because there's hiring from from the outside as opposed to promotion from within. When talent is built and promotion is favored from within the organization and talent is recognized by senior leadership, that is much more engaging than the reverse. So building trust and honest communication is key. The connectedness. And when we're talking, what are the behaviors that are associated with connecting with employees? I talked about this before, effectively communicating the organization's goals and objectives. And I'm talking about not revealing necessarily, not going into the nitty-gritty of the strategic plan and all of its minutiae, but painting a picture of what the organization is trying to achieve, so everybody can make their own micro decisions in accordance with that. And if everybody knows what the organization's goals and objectives are, we want to be the leader in our industry in 2 years. We want to look like this. We have a specific competitive issue with this competitor. We want to do that. It's really getting into enough detail around strategy to bring people on board and give them guidance and direction in terms of how that should guide micro decision making. Communicating, demonstrating the organizations in all behaviors and actions, walking the talk. Living the values. There's a lot of euphemisms and phrases I'm sure in HR you guys know very, very well. It really, I mean, when we're talking about senior management, the best thing to do is illustrate that with sort of the reverse. When we see there's been restructuring and been cost cutting and been maybe pay freezes and and certain leaders go out and buy a new car, shiny new car, and park it in the parking lot with their new bonus. That's a clear illustration of not walking the talk. I use that as a very flagrant example, but there's many examples that we can put in terms of the behaviors of doing that, because in many cases senior leadership are just not aware. Balance employee interests with those of the organization. Basically that actually means that there's going to be times where, whether the employee interest, whether it's salary, it's compensation, it's absenteeism, it's vacation, it's whatever, those are balanced with the short-term profitability. Empathy and caring for employees is a consistent theme. Those organizations that do it well are known for doing it well, and it really is one of those drivers of positive engagement. And then one of the ways one does that as senior leadership is making sure that they're visible in person or virtually. Some organizations are just too big or too sparsely distributed, so they're distributed all over a province or all over the country. That's not an excuse for hiding in one's office. Technology provides us a very, very easy way to make sure that our presence is felt and known. And that's, virtually through video, through blog, through interactive chat. I've seen some executives do call-in radio shows, that kind of thing. It really is, it's very, very important for the senior leadership to be visible in person or virtually. So that's the connectedness. Performance focus. It's not just about being nice people, and this is another big misnomer. A lot of executives feel that, yeah, I'm not a nice person, or I don't need to be a nice person, or I need to be hard-edged. The two are not mutually exclusive. Employees know this is a business. They know this is an organization that has a mandate, and they want performance goals. They want aggressive yet, realistic goals, but attainable goals. And they want more, most importantly, they want a culture of accountability. They want everybody, no matter where they are in the organization, to be accountable and to be held accountable for those goals. And not just at the bottom of the rung, everybody right throughout the organization. One of the things that can prove very detrimental for senior leadership teams' perception is the perception that poor performance is tolerated. It's much more important that poor performance and accountability is maintained by senior leadership than some of the other softer things. So performance focused is the next one. And then genuinely future and development oriented. And really this is about communicating their own excitement of the future of the organization. and ensuring employees understand how they contribute to the organization as a whole. So, they have that excitement. I've never met a senior leadership team that isn't where they are, that aren't excited for the future of the organization. The problem becomes how do they fill employees with that same sense of excitement? And this is really a communications challenge. But it's not a communications challenge that can be delegated. It's a communications challenge that we basically talk to senior management and coach them in terms of how to get their excitement out. And that really comes down to that level. It comes back to being connected and being visible and those things. And it's just that osmosis, that interaction or interplay with the more that they spend time with employees on the floor, on the front lines, in the offices, the more that excitement is going to get diffused and employees will understand it. So, and finally, around genuinely future and development oriented consultation. Consult widely but decide quickly. Inclusive decision-making styles are becoming more and more important. Consensus decision-making styles are becoming more and more important, even in organizations that tend to be traditionally more command and control, like public sector organizations, for example. Wide consultation is key because people need to be included in and be listened to and consulted and heard. The decision doesn't have to go their way, but at the same time, it cannot be endless consultation. There has to be, once the consultation phase is done, the decision has to come down, the decision has to be clear. And the decision has to also not try and please everybody, because that's not going to happen either. And it's actually respected. So consult widely, but decide quickly. So those are a lot of the different behaviors, and those are really what distinguish and separate those best players from the ones that are having trouble. So now that you're in the situation, hopefully not too many of you are in a situation where you've got to break the news to senior leadership. Their chart looks something like, let's put it this way, their chart looks like this on the right-hand side. So what is it, how do you break the news to them? Well, there's a number of tips. And if you were on my webinar last month, we talked about immediate management and the stages of result acceptance. Well, exactly the same thing applies to senior leadership. They're human just like anybody else. And they're going to go through and accept results in a series of phases. And we cannot rush those phases. So at first, we should be basically ready for denial and anger. The first reaction will be to blame the employees, often shoot the messenger type syndrome. At TalentMap, I often joke with my clients that I have a flak jacket waiting for that particular purpose, and I'll get to a slide in a second that you should actually ask the question, are you the best person really to deliver the results in a situation where that might be the case? Because anticipating denial and anger, it's par for the course. It's a normal human reaction, and of course, with some senior leadership teams, that can have very bad career consequences. So when we get from denial and anger, there becomes a rationalization or negotiation phase that takes place. Oh, we went through a lot of change this period. Oh, I was expecting the results to be a lot worse because this and that. Oh, we had to cut. We did the survey just 2 weeks after layoffs. That's bound to happen, that kind of stuff. So that's the negotiation phase. When you start to hear that kind of rationalization, that's actually a very, very good sign. Now, with immediate managers, it tends to slide into more of a depression in terms of a self-introspection. With most senior leaders, I find that's not the case. I find that they proceed directly from a negotiation to an acceptance. What we have to see happen is maybe not the depression that takes place, but the realization that they are the difference. They are the difference makers, and only they're the ones that will be in a position to change behavior. And when that happens, when you see that level of acceptance, it's at that point that you can play a pivotal role in terms of guiding them out of the canyon here, helping them with decisions, showing them the series of behaviors which I just showed you, and pointing out the differences in the comments related to your survey. And I often do a 2-column type chart where you see the comments from your organization and you compare them to the comments in the best practice organization, and then the leaders can see very, very clearly and start to say, okay, we need to change this, we need to change that, and then we can guide them out and guide them to action. And fundamentally, we're not on witch hunts. What we want them to do is we want them to collectively resolve to implement behavior change that's going to re-engage their employees. So what are some practical tips in terms of helping you do this? Well, first of all, we find that the key element in all of this is to make sure that nobody on the senior leadership team is put in a position where they lose face. And there's a couple of things, a couple of ways we do that. And sometimes I've actually had spirited discussions with some of the CEOs because they want to put and lay bare everybody's results in front of everybody, and that's not a good idea. If you've worked with us, or if you've worked with TalentMap before, you'll know what our heat maps are. And our heat maps are a tool that show everybody, every executive's area of responsibility compared to the whole laid bare, and we tend not to recommend not to show that in public. The worst thing you could do is to have someone lose face, because in that case, the stage of result acceptance essentially goes no further than anger, and we never get to acceptance. We stop at negotiation or rationalization, and people are saying, you know, if they lose face, they will not get to a situation where they can bridge that divide. So meet with the CEO alone first, if possible. It's sometimes, but not always, the CEO. It's often competing factions within the senior leadership team that drive these behaviors. So we need to understand, and the CEO needs to understand what those dynamics are. The heat maps that we talk about are very important in doing that. Oftentimes, the less said, the better. So judging your own senior leadership team, you may think, and I've seen this work very, very well, that here, slide them the report, undercover, no explanation whatsoever, let them read it, let them digest it, and then your door knocks or your phone rings or your email goes off and says, from someone in the senior leadership team saying, maybe we should talk about this. I was thinking of one particular financial institution, quite a large one, that we did about a year ago, where this is actually the case. The HR department, it was actually their CEO, or sorry, their CHRO that was a lot of the concern. And rather than present the results to that person, they actually just said, they sent them the report, and they said, and the person was being astute enough to realize that, oh my God, this doesn't look good. I need to get to the bottom of this. And then they went and came to them, and then at that point, they had gone through the denial, the anger, those different stages. And by the time they brought the HR and by extension TalentMap back into the portrait or into the picture, they were ready to hear some of the whys and wherefores and some of the proposed action. As I was talking about, avoid any comparison or contrast between areas of responsibility in a public setting. Or even in a private one. Yes, they're going to want to know their own results, and fine, that's okay. But senior leadership issue has to be positioned as a common issue. Individual VPs are more than happy to try to deflect responsibility or accountability for stuff like this. So if they tend to be a little bit perceived more positively compared to the whole, it's going to actually make it more difficult to achieve a common behavior change. So it has to be presented as a common issue. Then there's the question, are you the best place to deliver the message? And I think this is really where your survey provider, be they TalentMap or another company, can really help you ensure there's no loss of face and deliver that message in a safe way. Of course, avoid an inclination for told you so or vindication. Too often I've seen, and I can't blame you for this, I've seen a lot of HR folks who have been living under tyrannical leadership teams for a long time, who see the survey as, you know, and the messaging in the survey as potential for vindication. And that has to be avoided at all costs. So let the survey results speak the message, as I said before, and avoid any inclination for vindication or a told you so, or yes, we've been seeing this for a long time and nothing's been done type of attitude. We can't do that. We have to basically let things play their course. And then finally, and not unimportantly, we have to understand that most senior leadership teams are not aware of how they're truly perceived. They live in a bubble, even in the smallest organizations, and they listen to the people that are right around them. And in many, many, many cases, the weakest senior leadership teams also have the weakest people reporting to them, and it's a case of the emperor has no clothes, is they're not getting fed the truth. So understand that is the issue, and they're not aware of how they're truly perceived, and then cycle back to understanding those stages of result acceptance. Okay, so how do we get them to act? First of all, they need to come to that acceptance stage. You can facilitate the conversations, but you've got to allow them time for introspection. They've got to have time to come to grip with this and just be a sounding board. Don't try to push the agenda. And then help them identify the specific behaviors. Use this presentation that I'm showing you now to contrast their behavior with the best practice behavior and let them come to their own conclusions. And then finally, what are we trying to achieve out here? We're not trying to achieve some sort of big concession and contrition amongst the senior leadership saying, oh my God, we've been so wrong for so long. You know, that's nice to have, but that's not what's going to happen. What you need to do is essentially bring in a positive message and a commitment to behavior change and accountability for that behavior change, and then show them that that behavior change is necessary in order to lead them to having more engaged employees and all the benefits that entails. That's really what we're after. Don't lose sight of that. So, some final thoughts here as we close up. Trust, confidence, the positive perception of senior leadership, as we've seen, it's crucial amongst employees. If senior leadership is poorly perceived, you're not going to get good engagement. And it's such an important determinant of engagement. But behavior change amongst the senior leadership teams will yield a positive ROI. We can change the behaviors. We don't necessarily have to change personalities to do so. And most of these behaviors will be welcomed. It's much more a question of awareness and acceptance than it is a question of, old attitudes, sort of the old dog, new tricks types of phenomenon. Senior leadership tend to be very smart people. That's how they got to the positions that they got to. And they will make the changes that they think are necessary for their organization and for their career. And this is just showing them the road to get there. Anticipate those stages of result acceptance, particularly the denial and rationalization, and let them come to terms with it on their own terms. And then when they're ready, then they'll come to you, and then you can facilitate the move to action. And of course, the focus should always be on emulating those positive behaviors. So on that note, I am going to turn the mic back to Monica, who will let you know where TalentMap can be found in the next couple of months or so. And while, Monica, you're doing that, I am going to check our question board here. Hopefully you've got a number of questions that I can refer to. We still have a few minutes left in our session today. And so, Monica, on that, why don't you take it away?
Well, thanks for the insights and valuable tips, Norm. If you enjoyed this session, everybody, I just want to tell you about some of the other learning sessions we will be hosting. The next one is the Conference Board Engagement 2015 conference that's being held in Calgary on May 25th. We are going to be looking at some of TalentMap's research over the last 10 years, exploring some of the trends, extracting those trends, and providing some insights on what we really know about engagement. On May the 28th, we have a specialty webinar planned, and we're going to be looking at how to maintain momentum for employee engagement. This is a part 2 webinar. As part of our regular monthly series on June 25th, we are going to be doing a case study with the Edmonton International Airport, and we're looking at how they were able to improve employee engagement from survey implementation to beyond. And then finally, July 30th, we are doing another monthly webinar series that will focus on engaging your employees through a compelling organizational vision. So Norm, with that, did you want to field some of the questions?
Absolutely. So first of all, I have a question here that says we recently completed a staff engagement survey. The issues that came up around leadership have to do with trust, integrity, and accountability. Any suggestions on how to tackle these? Unfortunately, I would need more information around what that means. And what information basically that we would require would be what are the specific behaviors that employees see that undermine trust, undermine integrity, and accountability. Because when you see they have issues with trust, integrity, or accountability, your employees through the survey are coming out with conclusions that we don't trust them. They're, they're not accountable. What are the specific behaviors that they're seeing from the senior leadership that lead them to those conclusions? Then what we need to do is we basically have to obviously go through the process of identifying those behaviors to the senior leadership and showing them how the employees are drawing those conclusions. And then when we know what those behaviors are, we can basically start down the process of contrasting those with the behaviors amongst our best practices senior leadership teams. So a little bit more information, and we'd probably be able to do that. The next question here is, what do the red diamonds, the data in the red diamonds represent? Let me just flip back to, I think, what you're talking about in these red diamonds. Okay, those are simply, that's the point. These are all coordinates, which basically are a plot on a graph. So let me just use my pointer here. So this is actually a graph with 2 points. So on the left-hand side, this is a coordinate that says how strong engagement is, how strong senior leadership is in terms of engagement. And then this point here, where it is on this chart or on this axis, is how strong or how much better than they are in benchmark. So the point is actually a couple of coordinates on a chart. So hopefully that answers that question. Let me continue. What if the executive is aware but does not bother to make that change to engage his team member? How do we change that kind of attitude? You're going to get different levels of embrace. What you have to do is basically point out very, very clearly to the executive the consequences of the behavior, and link it back to the fact that if the behavior does not change, then the consequences of lower engagement, high attrition are likely the result, and then the costs that come with that. So, I mean, at some point, the business case for change has to be laid out there, and at some point, they're going to still resist that. So, but that becomes then, if the entire senior leadership is on board and then they see that drag, then the peer group of the senior leadership will actually take things into their own hands. Of course, that's a little bit utopic, what I'm talking about. Not everybody's going to change, but your role here in terms of pointing that out is to explain and very, very clearly show and delineate the behaviors and the consequences of those behaviors. Next one, what survey questions serve to identify senior leadership as the problem? We actually will show you what those are. They're right here if you look at your screen. So we ask 4 specific behaviors or attitudes and the level of agreement to which senior leadership exhibit those behaviors. So goal setting, I talked about that, setting ambitious and clear realistic goals. Clearly communicates their goals, that they act consistently, do what they say, so i.e. they walk the talk, and do they have trust and confidence in their ability to achieve the organization's goals. And of course, we also ask in the survey how individual respondents feel senior leadership can improve, and it's from those that I gleaned a lot of the comments that I showed you earlier on. Let me see, we have quite a few questions here. I'm not quite sure. So is it typical for employees to have higher expectations of senior leadership when they're in the same building versus employees' expectations in regional offices or where senior leaders visit from time to time? No, it's not typical. The expectation of senior leadership to do these things is the same whether or not we're in a regional office or whether or not we're in the head office. Where we see higher expectations of senior leadership in some cases are amongst professionals, in professional firms, amongst very, very highly educated employees. They tend to hold senior leadership to a higher standard, but the location doesn't necessarily differentiate, and that poses a challenge because visibility, as I was talking about, is so key. So obviously in a regional or remote office, senior leadership has more of a challenge of being visible. And essentially it's technology that's the key there. It's really around blocking and videos and allowing for communication and thinking about the regional office in their communications and how they communicate. That's so key. The mention of the fact that we're not, in the tone of communications, that it's regional offices are mentioned, they're brought, their topic of conversation, and in doing that, people realize that, okay, yeah, he's thinking or she's thinking about all of us, not just about the people right around him or her at the head office. Okay, so is it typical? I saw that. Yes, I mean, the lower leadership scores in head office versus regional offices, that might be a visibility issue. So I think that may be, but I'm speculating. I don't know around that. So final question here. Do you ever run a survey specifically designed around senior leadership performance and behaviors apart from the ones on page 9? We do. We don't necessarily run a separate survey, only because in many cases we get the results that we need around senior leadership with in this context and with these behaviors and the open-ended comments that go with it. In a custom case, we could certainly develop one for sure. But what we do specifically for senior leadership teams is not necessarily around the data collection and the survey, the diagnostic, but it is in terms of doing a workshop to help senior leaders address these issues and affect the behavior change that I've been talking about. I tend to spend a half day with senior leadership teams doing precisely what we've been talking about, showing them the results, showing them best practice behaviors, and helping them come to grips with and resolving to emulate those behaviors as much as possible. I think with that, on that note, time is running out, and I do believe I have addressed all your questions. I want to thank you very, very much for that. As Monica indicated, give us a few days to a week, and we will have both the presentation and the recording up on our website, so you can download those and hopefully put these to good use in terms of briefing your senior leadership teams and helping them change their behaviors to get more and better employee engagement. So on that note, thank you very, very much. I wish you all a wonderful remainder of your day. Thank you. Well, not-for-profits, many not-for-profits, if not the majority of not-for-profits, are fundamentally people-driven. And it's people and knowledge that are the engine behind